So as we look at objects from the Southern Campaign, and as we're looking for them for the SAR collection, we've really found that it's been pretty difficult to find those objects, especially objects provenance to individuals who participated in the Southern Campaign. And I recently got to ask a group of military historians why that is the case, why there's so few objects related to the Southern Campaign available today. And they ruminated on it. And one of the answers was obviously the Civil War and the destruction caused by that. There's just fewer objects available from those. And also, the Confederate Army had to press some Revolutionary War weaponry into use. So some of those objects were lost then. But then more broadly speaking is just the nature of the Southern Campaign and the war in the South. So you had people moving much more frequently. You didn't see the large winter encampments in the South like you saw in the North, where there was a great chance for armies to collect the detritus of war that are today the objects we collect or are part of that archaeological record. And then also there was much more short-term militia service in the Southern Campaign. So you had individuals coming from home serving for, maybe 5, 10, 15 days. They would have brought equipment with them, but they didn't have that really long military service where that object would have taken on the characteristics of being their specifically military, this is my canteen of the war, rather they just took their canteen along with them. So as a result of all that, we are really trying to stretch our interpretation and look at objects more uniquely to think about the Southern Campaign and find that evidence. So today's presentation is not a holistic overview of the Southern Campaign or meant to tell that complete story, but rather this is how we look at those objects and pull those stories out. And in some cases, we do have objects directly related to the Southern Campaign, and we will take a look at some of those. So let's jump into it. So here we have the dress sword of Joseph Graham. He was a militia commander from North Carolina. In mid-1780, General Cornwallis tried to invade North Carolina. He thought he could bring the colony back under the fold of the British Empire. And when he invaded the colony, or sorry, at that point, the state, he had to go through Charlotte. At Charlotte, Adjutant Joseph Graham assembled a group of militia, and they were there to harass the British. They were under no illusion that they would win, but they were there simply to slow them down. Joseph Graham commanded the rear action and is actually credited with help saving probably close to 1,000 militiamen to help them get away, otherwise they would have been captured. But during the retreat, he received 6 saber wounds and had 3 musket balls shot at him or extracted from his body after the battle, rather. After the war was over, he purchased or was given this dress sword, and we think it was probably in recognition of his military service. He continued serving throughout the war and served in over 15 engagements in total. And this came to the SAR from a generous donor, George Knight of the Virginia Society, who acquired it directly from a descendant of Joseph Graham. We want to take a closer look at this. So you can see this is specifically a dress sword. It is not really made for fighting. This is a sterling silver hilt. This would have been used for if he was going about business around town, if he was going to a formal event. He also served in 1814 in the Creek Wars, and he may have carried this with him then when he was a general in the North Carolina militia. As you can see here, right at the base of the blade, there's a mark. And also here, these are actually English hallmarks. This hilt was made in England, and we've not been able to identify the exact silversmith, but we know because of one of the marks that is a British silver hallmark that this sword was made about 1789 to 1791. So just after the war, you can see it is very highly decorated on the blade. Take one last look at this hilt. And I should say too, this sword was conserved in 2017. So it did not arrive at the SAR looking this good, but this is about how it would have looked when Joseph Graham purchased it. Okay. Thank you, Jacob. Here we have get this all on the screen, sorry. This is a British liege pattern infantry musket. In 1778, the British military realized that they were having a problem supplying their army with sufficient arms. So to have enough armament for the army fighting in North America, and by this point, France had entered the war and the war was expanding, the Tower of London, or the British Ordnance System, contracted with arms makers in Liege, Belgium. So this is known as a Liege pattern Brown Bess. It is actually of inferior quality to those that would have been produced in England. These cost about 70% of what it costs to make one in England. So they're not quite as tightly put together, but these are the types of arms that would have been given to loyalist militias that were being assembled throughout the South. A large part of the Southern strategy during the American Revolution was to have British troops march into areas, and they believed that loyalists would turn out in droves and do the fighting on behalf of the British. So these are the types of arms that were being given to those loyalist regiments, and those freed up the higher quality regular or English produced Brown Besses to go to the regular British regiments. So we take a closer look at this. You can see, focus this quick. Here on the barrel, just next to my thumb, is an IG. That's actually the mark of the Belgian barrel maker. Had this been made in England, you would have a string of marks on here saying that it was made for the Tower, but this one has distinct Belgian marks. If you're familiar with Brown Besses, you know that on the lock, they do have that crown and GR, and then down here it says Tower. This was not made at the Tower, but they just put that mark on there anyways to make it look like the regular thing. All these engravings on here are of inferior quality. If you get to see, a pattern 1756 or even a pattern 1769 Brown Bess, they're just going to be a little bit more crisp. But since this was made in Belgium and then it was put into service for the British Army, down here on the buttstock, just next to my thumb, it's hard to see, but this is actually a lion passant. So it's a lion with the crown. That's one of the final inspector marks that were placed on these guns. These did come back to the Tower of London. They were proof. They were looked at by the same inspectors who did the English produced Brown Besses. And that's one of the final marks saying that this is ready for use in the British military. So at that point, it's actually sent over to a unit. And then right here next to my thumb, if you can see, there's a small crown and there's a number right here is a number 1. This is actually from the storekeeper. So this would have left the Tower of London. It would have gone to an armory. This is the stamp that was put on there when they put it in the rack to show that, this is like an inventory number, or that, it's ready to be issued. And then this one probably was issued to a loyalist regiment, or a unit rather, and it may have actually been captured and used by Patriot forces. You have here, these types of engravings on here are very typical for militiamen to put on here. These are probably stylized initials. People would do this to show that, this is my firearm. If you do have to stack your arms or make a stand of arms, it's easy to find yours after that engagement is over and you're heading back out into the field. But otherwise, it really overall just looks kind of like your standard Brown Bess. So one last look at the lock plate on here. Okay. Jacob. I'm holding here. This is, move over here, take a step back so you can see it. This is another firearm that was acquired by the Tower of London under the same types of circumstances that those Liege muskets were. This is a 1730s Dutch musket. This was probably originally used by maybe a police force or a militia in the Dutch Republic during the 7 Years' War. the British government purchased over 60,000 of these surplus Dutch muskets and sent them to North America. And they specifically sent them to Virginia and South Carolina that we know of for sure. These would have remained in storehouses. These would have been used by militia, even after the 7 Years' War and those interim years before the Revolutionary War. And then as the war moved south, these would have been brought back out. And we know that there were Continental troops and militiamen at the Battle of Cowpens who were using these surplus Dutch muskets from the 7 Years' War. We take a closer look at this one. You can see there's a very distinct marking here on the barrel. There's a C:1001. I've actually gotten a chance to talk to a curator at the Dutch National Military Museum, and he is an expert in these firearms, and they even do not know exactly what these are for. They suspect these are probably from when this was part of a police force or a local militia in the Dutch Republic, that this was a rack number or kind of a pseudo serial number. You can see this musket has your very typical Dutch lock from the early 18th century that's called the banana style lock. You can see it's got that loose banana shape. Very distinctive side plate on here. A lot of these types of side plates have been found around Fort Ticonderoga and throughout archaeological sites in the South. This kind of serpentine shape, very distinctively Dutch, very Dutch trigger guard on here. And then also of interest on this, let me get the lighting right for you. So right here under my thumb, turn this around so you can see the right perspective, are the initials I or JN. This is probably put on here by an American soldier, either during the 7 Years' War or possibly during the American Revolution. Putting your initials on the right side of the butt plate was a very typically American thing to do. This is really only found in North America. And this is probably one of those firearms that was used or brought back out of storage for use in the Revolution. Take one more look at that lock plate. Sorry, it's upside down, but okay, hand this off. All right, so what I'm holding here is a pipe head Tomahawk pipe head. Sorry, it's a mouthful. This probably dates from 1750 to 1800 thereabouts. These were very important pieces of equipment or accoutrement, and also ceremonial significance for Native American tribes. So when you think about the American Revolution, there's really no universal truths, so to speak. When you think about Native Americans, you really have to get down to the individual unit level, whether it's a village or a community or a group of communities. But pipe tomahawks were very important for diplomatic and also ceremonial events when it came to Native Americans. So specifically with the Southern Campaign, you really have a lot of influence that we don't always think about, especially with the Creeks and the Cherokees. There was a lot of negotiation, a lot of bartering to get alliances or to get the military force. But pipehead tomahawks would be used at the opening of all diplomatic engagements. Everyone would smoke the tomahawk or smoke the peace pipe rather. That's a show that you are open to good diplomatic talks, that you're going to stick to your word, and that everyone's speaking on the same level. So if we take a closer look at this one, the camera down a little, you can see this is all one piece. This is made by a very highly skilled craftsman. This is a functional pipe bowl on here. Try to see if I can get it to where you can see it. You can see there's the hole into the stem. So there would be a handle coming out of this that would be a functional handle for the tomahawk that would have a hole drilled all the way down. So it would also be a functional pipe. but this is a very popular style, just this sloping blade with the slope on the bottom here. You can see this has a pretty highly decorated faceted bowl on here as well. So this is a really great example. You would have found this throughout North America, but you definitely would have found this among the tribes and nations, and also the representatives representing the British and the Americans in the Southern Campaign. Okay, one last look at that. Okay, and then thank you, Jacob. Okay, what I'm holding here is a pattern 1759 Elliott Light Dragoon pistol. These types of pistols were developed during the 7 Years' War, specifically for use in North America. Prior to these types of pistols, you really have much larger, heavier Dragoon pistols, but during the 7 Years' War, especially after the Braddock campaign, some British units and a gentleman by the name of Elliott realized that lighter equipment could be used for lighter troops who could move over further distances and act more like striking units. So this is a very good example. Take a closer look at it, but so this is the only regulation pattern British pistol in the SAR collection, but I'm going to show you here. This is a much earlier, well, not about 30 years earlier, French cavalry pistol. So you can see from the early mid 18th century, as you're getting towards the American Revolution, these pistols are getting smaller in size, they're getting sleeker, and they're going to be easier to use from horseback. Take a closer look at these. So you can see here, when we were talking about that liege pattern brown bess, again, here's your Crown GR cipher. And on here, this is one that was actually made in England. So you're going to see a higher level of detail and skill from the craftsman. And here on the lock, I will try to get this to focus so you can see it. There we go. You can see the name of the lock maker, Vernon, 1760. So that is an arms manufacturer who was making lock plates for the British military. And this would have been sent to the tower where this gun would have been assembled. You can see this is an all original one. It hasn't been polished like a lot of examples you'll find from the period. And this is actually more ideal. You don't want to have those abrasive polishes on there. But this pistol, the Elliott Light Dragoon pistol, we know was issued to the British 16th and 17th Light Dragoons. And both of those units were at the Battle of Cowpens. And detachments of them were also serving with Bannister Tarleton. So we know that this pistol was being used throughout the Southern Campaign. And then also this is the most widespread pistol of the American Revolution. Both sides are using this, especially as the war moves south and you have more mounted units. Both British and American are going out of their way to get a hold of these. One more quick look at that. Okay. So moving on here. The SAR is very lucky to be the home of all 4 volumes of William McDowell's original diaries from the American Revolution. He served with the 1st Pennsylvania Regiment, which set out from York, Pennsylvania in late May of 1781. They didn't know it yet, but they were heading south as part of the Yorktown campaign. And they marched a long distance through the backwoods of Virginia to meet up with the Marquis de Lafayette. And this regiment was actually under the command of Anthony Wayne. So let me open this up here. We're going to take a look at June 15th, 1781. Go back one page, my apologies. Okay, so you can see there at the bottom, I'll read it for you. Took up the line of march at sunrise, a great scarcity of water this day, in a very fatiguing march. refreshed ourselves in an orchard with Colonel Robinson, the Marquis, and General Wayne. Took a bite with us, 14 miles, Hanover County. So it's pretty remarkable to think about. William McDowell wrote this diary just after sitting in an orchard and taking a bite to eat with the Marquis de Lafayette and Anthony Wayne. They made their way south. They continued marching through Virginia. They actually arrived in Yorktown just in time for the surrender and to see the grounding of arms. And later in the diary, McDowell talks about that. But very remarkable piece. He carried these with him throughout the Revolution, and he continued to serve until after the war. So thinking about Yorktown, this was very big news. And to think about the Southern campaign from the perspective of some of the northern states, we have here a copy of the New Hampshire Gazette from Saturday, October 27th, 1781. A lot of local news in here, local happenings. But if you switch over to page 3, come down for you here. So you can see here, Portsmouth, October 27th. 7 o'clock last evening, the following extract of a letter dated Boston, 8 o'clock the 26th, is this moment received by express from Newburyport in 3 hours and a half, viz. An express in this moment arrived from Newport who brings the important intelligence of the unconditional surrender of the proud Cornwallis with his whole army to the illustrious, all caps, Washington on the 20th instant. So this gives you an idea of how news traveled, and it took 7 days for the news of Yorktown to make its way up to New Hampshire. So as we continue down this column, there's more news down here. And this is actually not talking about Yorktown. It's talking about how the news made its way to this newspaper. So-and-so saw so-and-so at Newport who told so-and-so who wrote a letter. And it goes on, and you actually can come up here to column 3, I'm sorry. And all of this coming down, you're getting the reports as it was reported in Newport, as it was reported in Boston, and they give you the whole chronology of how this news made its way up the East Coast. So it really took, a little over a week for people in the farthest reaches up in New England to find out about the Battle of Yorktown and the surrender. So one more look at that headline on there, or title. Okay. Another pistol in the SIR's collection. This is a pretty special one to have. This is a model 1752/3 Spanish standard pistol. This was the standard pistol of the Spanish army for over 40 years until after the Revolution. But actually very early in 1775, even before Lexington and Concord, there was a merchant in Spain working with a merchant in New England to ship some of these from the King of Spain's stores to North America. And these pistols, not this one specifically, but this model constituted some of the first material aid to the American Revolution from a foreign government. But as the standard pistol, this is what the troops marching with Galvez across the Gulf Coast to Pensacola would have been carrying. This is a very large pistol. It's almost twice the size of the Elliott Light Dragoon pistol that we were just looking at. This is a catch-all pistol, so to speak. So this would have been used by officers, mounted troops, all of the above. Let's take a closer look at this one. So you can see this pistol has this very distinct Spanish lock on here. This is called a Miquelette lock. Got these really oversized jaws. And this one is actually right here, dated 1760. We haven't identified the individual yet, but there is a maker's mark on here. Overall, if you look at this, it's very similar to French pistols. Spanish and French kings are both Bourbon monarchs, so they were sharing designs. You have here on the escutcheon R for Roy. Very distinct. Sometimes called the Spanish dragon side plate. But very distinct Spanish parts on here. You would have seen this throughout, especially the Gulf Coast, and you would have also seen it up the Mississippi River Valley. This is being used by some of those Spanish colonies. And then Spain's also supplying arms to individuals like George Rogers Clark, who are operating out in the West. So one more quick look at this. Okay. Coming back to this is a Conglomeration French infantry musket. This is not a recognized pattern, but this this specific musket is one of the first of the 17,000 of about 100,000 muskets that France would supply to the United States during the Revolution. By the time of the Southern Campaign, the Continental Army has really built up a head of steam, especially with the support of France. And this is what a lot of your soldiers who are in proper Continental units are going to be carrying throughout the Southern Campaign. Again, this is, move it back over here. This is just a combination of French firearms parts that had been pulled out of barrels. So you have everything from the early 1750s up to the late 1770s. They're just being put together in functional muskets. Let's take a closer look at this one. So you can actually see here on the barrel, get this to focus. Right here next to my finger is a little NH. That's actually for New Hampshire. This gun was in the armory of New Hampshire, and it remained there actually until the late 19th century, when it was then taken out of the arsenal and given to a governor. So we have really good provenance of this gun. But this is exactly the type of thing that the Continental Army would have been carrying. You can see, let me flip this around for you, my apologies. This lock, it's made at Charleville. The other components, right here you have your star next to a D. That is an inspector's mark for the barrel. So all very standard French parts, but not matching up. But you do have, again, on the butt plate in typical American fashion, you have initials. Then again, on the other side, you've got more initials. You have an SW. Sorry, that is upside down. And then here again is another NH for New Hampshire. Some more just kind of scrimshawing on here. But this is, throughout the Southern Campaign, especially by the time you're getting to Yorktown and in the later years, most of your American soldiers are going to be carrying these Conglomeration muskets. So one more quick look at that. Okay. So here we have another French firearm. This is a model 1763/66 pistol. This is numerically of the known models given to the Continental Army. This is the one that they gave the most of. These were just out of date for the French Army. They had just come up with a new pistol, and so they were giving last season pistols to the Continental Army. It has this very distinct double band on here. This is a innovation of the French Army. But throughout the Southern Campaign, again, you're going to have those mounted troops who are serving as part of the Continental Army. They're going to be using what they can get their hands on, and these are what they would have had. And especially by Yorktown, you have reports of a lot of officers carrying these. This is a standard issue model. Everything is marked for the French Army. It's likely that this exact pistol probably never saw field service, since it is in such remarkably good condition. But you find records of these throughout, or reports of these throughout the records. One more quick look at that. This is another one made at the Charlottesville Armory. Okay. We have this is a Horseman saber made by Jeremiah Snow of Springfield, Massachusetts. At the beginning of the war, Jeremiah Snow is a silver and goldsmith, and he figures out that if I can work with silver and gold, I can probably make hilts for swords. So that's what he started doing. There's been a lot of this exact pattern of sword found throughout North America, and for a couple hundred years, historians weren't sure who made them. Two examples with Jeremiah Snow's mark were found, and so they think he probably started producing these at the beginning of the Revolution. And then after Yorktown, as victory becomes clear, and that the traitorous army that he was supplying is now going to become a new government, he starts putting his mark on there. It seems safe to do so. So these have been identified to him. This is a Spanish blade with a very standard. He put the same style of hilt on all of his swords, which is how we identify them. But this is a very typical Horseman saber that would have been being sent to the Southern theater for those mounted troops, again, who are moving, all across the Southern states. Take a really quick look at this. So this is your very standard Jeremiah Snow hilt. You just have a wooden handle on here, and unfortunately it's lost its original wire beading. There would have been copper wire wrapped in there. But you just have this simple urn pommel, and this is called a D guard. And then you have a single loop here, counter guard, with a very simple quillon. But you can see this is a Spanish 3-fuller blade. So somehow Jeremiah Snow is getting Spanish blades imported into Massachusetts. So he's probably making these in large numbers later in the war. And a lot of them are probably being sent to the Southern theater. Last look at that. All right. One second to get this set up so you can see a little better. So this is a miniature portrait of Captain David Campbell. He fought with the British 63rd Regiment of Foot. He landed in New York pretty early in the war and served throughout some of the northern campaigns, and then moved south, and he was actually at the siege of Charleston. And we think actually the occupation of Charleston, sorry. And while he was there, we believe he became smitten with a young lady, and he, was driven from the city. After the war, he returned to England. We believe this portrait was done of him in 1781. And then around 1784, he returned to Charleston. He became an American citizen, and he married the woman that he met most likely during the war. And he remained there for the rest of his life. And he died in 1822 and is buried in Charleston. So you can see, I'll just place my thumb here next to it. This is a miniature portrait. This is made to be worn as a piece of jewelry, most likely a brooch or a necklace. But it's done by an artist named George Englehart. He worked for George III. He was a painter who did, a lot of the royals, high-ranking British officials. And we actually have in George Englehart's official records that he painted Captain Campbell in late 1781. So this is very remarkable. You can see for how small it is, there's a lot of detail. And I'm sorry, it's actually behind glass, so it's very difficult to get a good shot of it on camera without a bit of glare. But you can see, he's in his military uniform. His hair is typical of the period. He may be wearing a wig, but a remarkable piece. Very glad to have it at the SAR. I'll flip it over quick so you can see the back. It's just encased in copper. So again, this is made to be worn as a piece of jewelry. One last quick look at him. right. Getting the next one out of the box. So here we have another miniature portrait. This is a real treasure of the SAR collection. This is a miniature portrait of Dr. James Craik. This was done by Charles Wilson Peale, and it was painted at Valley Forge in late April and early May of 1778. James Craik was good personal friends with George Washington. They met during the Braddock campaign, and Washington convinced Dr. Craik to move to Virginia to be his personal physician, and so they could physically be closer or geographically closer to each other. During the Revolution, Craik accompanied the army. He accompanied Washington at Valley Forge, and early 1781, Craik is actually up in Rhode Island where he set up some hospitals, and he is treating French troops as they're stationed up there. As the Yorktown campaign gears up, Craik is called south, and he's actually at Yorktown where he sets up multiple hospitals for the French and the Continental armies. And he's really acting kind of as the Surgeon General, so to speak, of the Yorktown campaign once you get into the siege. Dr. Craik remains close personal friends with George Washington after the war. They both, obviously we all know Washington lived in Virginia, but Craik also lives the rest of his life in Virginia, and he's actually at Washington's deathbed in 1799 as one of the three or four attending doctors. I'm sorry, I can't remember the exact number, but this descended in the Craik family and was donated to the SAR a little over a decade ago for a very special piece to have. Let's quick look at him. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Rayanne and see if we have any questions.
All right, thank you, Zach. That was excellent. I don't see any questions in the chat box, so if anyone wants to type any or just let us know, since we're a pretty small group here. In the meantime, I would like to give a special thanks to Jacob Kaler, who's been assisting behind the scenes with the artifacts, and Drew Height, who is our technical assistant in the background, making sure you get the camera switches so you can see the items up close and the audio and everything like that. I have also put in the chat box a link to the artifact wish list, and that is continually being updated, and many of the things that were featured here today did come from that artifact wish list in the artifact donor program. And so we thank everyone for their participation in that. Any questions, anybody?
When this wish list is updated, is it posted on the SAR website where it's easy to find?
Yeah, so there is a permanent link to that wish list, and that is an active wish list. So when I update it, if you follow that link, you will always see the latest version. And that's the link. Yeah.
We've got a question. Alan Furlow would like to know, can we see some of the front sling rings on the rifles?
Yes. Do you have one in particular you'd like to see? Or otherwise, I think let's just take a look at the French one. Conglomeration musket.
Yeah, it was just there was like a couple that looked like it was just tacked onto the wood on the barrel, as opposed to being on the barrel ring.
Yeah, so this is, let's go back to the overhead quick, Drew. So here you have, this is the French Conglomeration musket, and this is your pretty standard. You can see it's actually in the ring here. And we're pretty lucky on this one. These are the original sling rings on here. So you've got one on the first band. Moving up, this band does not have one. And then you can see here it's integrated into the trigger guard.
On the Belgian models and the other earlier ones, are there some that are just tacked into the wood on the handguard?
So take a look here. So this is the Belgian Liege one. You can see there's an empty hole there. That is where that one would have been. And then in typical fashion, you have here, you can actually see, let me, if I can get it. You can see it goes all the way through. That's actually your empty sling swivel sling channel on the brown bess. It was actually just part of the stock. That's pretty standard for period brown besses.
Okay, thank you.
Zach, Dr. Gregory would like to know, what are some of the resources you use when you research these objects?
Great question. So we use, we have a number of resources in our resource library. So these are publications that are done by other curators and historians who are experts in particular types of objects. So we have a book called Swords and Blades of the American Revolution, where that's by George Newman, who is a very renowned collector. That's one that we rely on heavily. We have other books ranging from, brass of the 18th century to firearms, Dutch firearms of North America. So these are some of the resources we use. And then we're also looking at other museums. So really good source are museums who have some of these pieces that are provenance from the era. So as we look at some representative examples, we can look at known examples from other institutions. So we're looking at Colonial Williamsburg, Museum of the American Revolution, a lot of the state historical societies, especially when we're researching the Southern Campaign. Just today, we were looking at I believe the Institute of Cultural Resources for the state of Georgia. So we're really looking for good known sources, and depending on the object, we have to get creative sometimes. And if anybody watching ever has questions about the sources particularly that we use or needs specific recommendations, feel free to reach out and we're happy to help connect you with that information.
And I'll go ahead and put your email in the chat box in case they'd like to reach out that way.
Yeah.
Scott Gilner wants to know, were the miniature portraits paint or color pencil? There seemed to be minimal fading in the color.
Good question. So they are actually both watercolor on ivory. So it's a very thin sliver of ivory. It's a very stable material. And then, watercolor portraits on there. And luckily, these two portraits have both been cared for very well throughout their life. Sometimes you'll find miniature portraits of the era that are very faded. They've been left out. They've been on display. They haven't been cared for well. But those materials do hold up. And then luckily, both of the miniature portraits in the SAR collections are both under glass as well, which has helped preserve them. Good question.
Okay, any final questions, anyone?
I got another quick one.
Oh, perfect.
The very first pistol you showed, in the quick glimpse I got, the frizzen didn't really show any marks that would indicate that it had been used,
Yes.
but the wood was kind of beat up. Do you think the frizzen was replaced?
Nope. The 1759, please.
I think it was the first one.
Yes. So if you want to go to the overhead, so you can see here, it doesn't show too much use. I think it has been used a little bit, but yeah, it probably was replaced. They would also resurface these, which this one doesn't show any evidence of being resurfaced. So it may be a period replacement. I think you're right that looking at the wood and looking at the rest of this pistol definitely saw field service, but for pistols, firearms of this era in general, the cock, the frizzen spring, these are all things that are very typical to be found replaced. And for some of these examples too, if they came out of field duty, they may have been worked on and put into storage for, to be reissued and then never saw the field again. So that's why you might find parts sometimes that are in really good condition for that individual component.
Okay, we have a question from Paul who wants to know, is there any more information on Colonel Robinson mentioned in the diary?
Yes, so if If anyone is interested, that entire diary is transcribed. So Colonel Robinson was a commander in the 1st Pennsylvania. I can't tell you too much off the top of my head, but I know that's a very well-researched regiment. And that diary is quoted quite a bit in historical research. So there is information out there, but I'd be happy to share that transcript with anybody who would like it.
Okay, next, Jay Deloach would like to know what artifact is at the top of your wish list for the museum?
Oh boy. So actually a number of objects related to the Southern Campaign. A Royal Highland Regiment marked Scottish pistol. This is an all steel pistol. I believe this is number 4 on the wish list right now. The Scottish regiments were the only regiments where infantrymen were issued pistols. So these were found throughout the Southern Campaign. And then also a lot of the Scottish loyalists who had moved to North America in the mid-18th century, they continued that tradition of carrying all steel pistols. We also have on the wish list right now a powder horn that is marked and dated for the Battle of Brooklyn. So it doesn't have any initials. We don't know the exact person who used it, but it appears to be a soldier's powder horn that was carried during the Battle of Brooklyn in August 1776. So that is one that we are very keen to add to the collection. And we also have a sword that is an American copy of a Potter's sword. James Potter was making swords in New York City for the British Army, and a lot of those swords were being sent south, especially, with Bannister Tarleton. Again, the 16th and 17th British Light Dragoons were carrying Potter swords, and American commanders like Light Horse Henry Lee were either trying to get their hands on Potter swords, or they were working with local American cutlers who would make copies of them. They were really well designed, and they're one of the most emblematic swords of the American Revolution. So those are really 3 that we're keen to work on right now. Thank you for asking that, Jay.
Well, I don't see anything else in the question box, Zach.
Okay. Well, we can wrap up a few minutes early. I tried to get through all those objects so we could take a look at all of them and make sure that we saw each of them. But if anybody has, questions about these objects or anything else in the collection, reach out anytime. Please take a look at that artifact wish list. If you're interested to see what objects we are finding right now, or just the types of things that we're looking for the museum collection as the 250th approaches, and then also thinking ahead to the education center and museum. We're building the collection with a lot of intention to be a resource for the public and for SAR members. And again, Rayanne said these are going to be quarterly live sessions, so please look for the invitation to the next one related to the next selections from the collection magazine article. And Rayanne, if you have anything else to add?
No, just thank you all for attending, and this will be has been recorded, and it will be on that Reach Education website. So please, if you enjoyed this, tell all of your friends, and when the next one comes along, let other people know. Thank you so much for attending.
Thank you, everyone.